Melvin, you mentioned a clog of biotech and life science companies waiting to exit. How is it affecting the investment landscape in these sectors?
Yeah, the VCs and just investor landscape, they've been waiting for some sort of exit opportunity to kind of bring liquidity to their fund. There's a lot of times that a company is kind of waiting to IPO and a fund is encouraging to IPO or have an M&A exit. But if there aren't a lot of buyers in the market, which there haven't been over the last year or two just because of the economic conditions, there just isn't as much activity and isn't much movement. And so there is a lot of companies, not just within the biotech space, but venture, broadly speaking, has been very slow just because companies are waiting for some sort of liquidity event to help spur activity and move deals along. But especially
Mhm.
for the biotech and bioengineering, life sciences space, I like to say that the public markets tend to indicate and precede what happens in the venture community. And the public
Mhm.
markets, from a life sciences perspective, it's been really difficult for a lot of publicly traded companies. And because of that, there's just this overhang of maybe negative sentiment or just uneasiness in the markets. And that's something that hopefully is going to change into the new year. That's something that I'm optimistic about. I think coming into 2025, there seem to be a lot of positive tailwinds that are potentially going to bring at the market and just increase activity so that people, biotech companies can get funding, they can exit, and they're just renew the cycle of just flowing to the right places.
Throw your hands up if you with it. Drop it.
Welcome to another episode of Explore the Opportunities with AI. We're so thrilled to have Melvin Lai, a senior associate at Silicon Foundry. Welcome to the show, Melvin.
Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. So, before we begin, can you please share a little bit about your background and your journey from M&A consultant at PwC to becoming a venture advisor at Silicon Foundry?
Thank you so much having me here. I think I'm actually, so in terms of background, I was pursuing the CPA route. I was a public accountant, worked at PwC doing an accounting major from university. A lot of
Mhm.
what I was doing there was the mergers and acquisitions work with them. So specifically, we had a lot of private equity clients at PwC, and a lot of the times when it came to transactions and M&A, them
Mhm.
kind of adding companies to their portfolio, they would hire PwC, they would hire advisors to make sure that the target companies they were acquiring were financially sound, tax
Mhm.
sound. We provide that kind of due diligence for them in those areas. It was a great place
Mhm.
to launch my career, a great place to meet a lot of different professionals and understand all the different components of an M&A transaction. But also,
Mhm.
what I found was it led me to understand a little bit of what I wanted to do a little bit more in the future. So, what I
Mhm.
found was that in these deals, PwC, we would be brought in at the very last minute. The deal would basically be signed, and they just needed us to check the box off of the transaction to make sure that everything was normal. But I really wanted to be early stage. I really wanted to be part of the initial strategy conversations to decide what markets should we pursue, what companies are out there. Let's talk with those founders and figure out whether or not there's some sort of acquisition transaction available, and just be that more strategic early stage planning, which kind of led me to Silicon Foundry. Silicon Foundry, I'll explain a little bit more about what we do later on, but at least from a day-to-day basis, it really is doing a lot of this type of work that a venture capital fund would be doing, meeting with founders, meeting with investors, understanding the startup community. But specifically, we help advise corporate clients, Fortune 500s, who want to be in tune and tapped into the venture ecosystem, but they
Mhm.
don't always have the resources to do so. I partner with their corporate innovation teams or corporate venture teams and help them develop those early stage strategies, help them understand what markets are out there that kind of impact their core business, what's on the
Mhm.
horizon for them, and how do you take advantage of that, whether that be M&A or whether that be deploying investments or just a customer relationship and a joint venture. All of those kinds of collaboration avenues are on the table for us. And that's what I've been
Mhm.
spending the last 3 years doing at Silicon Foundry. It's been a great experience so far.
I love that your background in M&A, and I bet it would probably be a huge factor for your current position right now at Silicon Foundry. Do you agree? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say really a lot of what we did was understanding the core business and everything involved with that business. And so sometimes a lot of our due diligence conversations, we would be meeting with the founders and they would be going through, especially if it was like a family owned business that they've their baby over the last 5 to 10 years. We learned to uncover every stone, all the skeletons in the closet, and sometimes those are uncomfortable conversations with some of those founders. But in general, finding everything to do with that business, that's a lot of the carryover. What I do now is understanding startups, understanding as you mentioned in my intro, digital health, climate
Mhm.
tech, and Industry 4.0, all these kinds of industries, really understanding the founders, their mission, and just take their product and know how do we actually implement that in the real world? How do we get that into a real scalable project and pilot that hopefully just helps them scale further and faster?
Yeah, so when you mention Industry 4.0, can you explain what is it about?
Yeah, I realize it's not as common of a nomenclature outside
Yeah.
of what I do from a day-to-day basis. If you think about all things in industry right now, a lot of the things that they try to do from an automation perspective, yes, they have robotics, yes, they have certain dashboards that kind of con con bring all the information together. Essentially, what Industry 4.0 is taking all these siloed systems, all these siloed data aspects of a warehouse, whether that be on the floor or whether that be supply chain logistics, all these different disparate sources and bringing them under one roof and have the analytics associated with understanding everything that's going on in a specific facility. So there's the term like Internet of Things, IoT. There's also the industrial Internet of Things where you have sensors that are attached to specific machinery. And so when you have machinery in the hundreds in a specific facility, but then you also have facilities in different geographies around the world. You want to be able to help centralize all that information and actually create real time or act on real time insights and be able to just understand what's going on in your day to day operations rather than have some sort of delay or a lag when it comes to how, especially these heavy industrial clients, which these are their core operations. They want to make sure that their core operations are running as expected.
Oh wow, that's a huge range for you to be in Industry 4.0 and biotech, life science, and then as well as AI.
Yeah, all things AI touch all those things. And in general, if I was to mention like Silicon Foundry itself, like we advise a whole range of clients from supply chain logistics through cosmetics and pharma and biotech. A lot of these companies, they have different industries, but you think about like horizontal themes, you think about broad horizontal trends that are happening across the industry, AI being
Mhm.
one of them.
Mhm.
Those are things that impact every single one of those businesses, whether that be an administrative function or even their core operations. It's important for us to relay that information to our clients and be that advisor and that lens for them to understand the market from.
So, does Silicon Foundry specialize in like mainly in AI right now? If you have to advise a company that are tech advanced, do you have the resources to help them?
Yeah, absolutely. Really what we try to do is just understand AI technology or just technologies in general, how they impact the market and how they impact the core businesses of our clients. And so even when it comes to broader trends, like when there was Web 3.0 and augmented
Right.
reality, virtual reality, a lot of our
Mhm.
clients were interested in those spaces. How do these emerging technologies affect their current business? And so all throughout these different trend cycles, I'd like to say that we are kind of ahead of the game when it comes to knowing that these are coming down the line. I think by the
Mhm.
time that TechCrunch or CNBC, by the time that they kind of discuss a certain trend, I'd like to say that we knew about it a couple months ago, just because for us, we're headquartered in San Francisco, but we have people and we have a presence in all the major tech hubs within the US, New York, Boston, Miami, LA. And a lot of what we try to do is just kind of be embedded into ecosystems, meeting with
Mhm.
founders, meeting with investors, and understanding what are they seeing. Because if anything, they are the ones who are most in tune with where the market is headed. And we basically take that information and kind of let that inform the advice that we give to our corporate clients.
That's so cool. Can you share like an example of like a successful collaboration between a big corporation like Fortune 500 companies into like a small startup Silicon Valley facilitate? Mm-hmm.
I can give you one specifically within the biotech space. Within the diabetes space, one of the major insulin pump manufacturers. If you think about a diabetes patient, whether they be type 1 or type 2, um, they might have a CGM or a continuous glucose monitor attached to them. and that kind of helps regulate their insulin. And then that might be attached to a device that is more that automatically distributes insulin that helps kind of regulate their diabetes condition. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the manufacturer we've been working with them for the past like 3+ years. It's been a great relationship. We were helping them actually identify a new type of form factor for their pump. So the pump that they existing right now have, it's kind of a bigger material that they have to have strap onto someone's body, and it's kind of a tube function as well. And you also have to manually re um, add to the reservoir of insulins for them to actually keep the patient has to do a lot of manual work to kind of keep
Mm-hmm.
that tube pump
Right.
operating effectively. Basically, we actually helped with an acquisition deal where we're actually acquiring a the idea is more of a patch pump. So instead of having something that has a bunch of tubes and is kind of messy, you would actually have a patch pump that you could add to the body, and it would have
Mm-hmm.
refillable cartridges. So instead of having to manually insert with a syringe the insulin, you would actually have a cartridge that you kind of plug in,
Mm-hmm.
and you also recharge that patch as well, so that that's how you kind of keep the battery up. So we were helping with that in terms of the strategic planning of that acquisition. We even were talking with like surveying endocrinologists and other primary care providers just to see, hey, is this a compelling form factor for your patients having a patch versus a tubed system? And then when it actually came to the actual deal itself, we were helping kind of help with the negotiations aspect. We would meet with the target company, kind of talk with their founders, and at least at the very end, it kind of helped with us being almost the middleman and helping them kind of reach to an agreement when it comes to actual contracting and deals for
Mm-hmm.
that acquisition. So that was a great, I guess,
Right.
case study of us kind of working out with
Mm-hmm.
that biotech company, helping kind of bring that acquisition in house.
Yeah, that's just like synergy, right?
Hmm. Exactly. And like I said, it's this is their core business was a tube system. They had to be
Mhm.
aware of what are
Right.
certain things that are coming into the market or new form factors that they should be aware of. And if they
Mhm.
can't build it in house, you got to find some way to be on top of it. And so they inevitably decided on acquisition.
Oh wow, that's so amazing. So in terms of like helping with the acquisition, what is it Intel? Can you share a little bit process, like for
It
example?
varies.
Yeah.
We work in that situation. We work with the corporate development team, and the corporate development team tends to be in charge of external innovation and maybe acquiring and investing in companies.
Ah.
For them, they were already kind of in the process. They were already in discussions with the target company, and we kind
Mhm.
of plugged in the middle of their conversations and kind of helped advise them where they needed to be. And so that's usually within the case. Sometimes. We kind of get thrown in right in the middle of a existing transaction. We have to find our way to fit in, but sometimes we
Mhm.
get brought in earlier on, and we're able to help navigate the strategy and navigate the approach when it comes to pitching with one of these companies and just bringing
Mhm.
it from end to end transaction.
Okay, that's so cool. So it's like you guys are like vehicles.
At least I think we help accelerate existing transaction because I think without us, it probably would have taken a
Uh-huh.
lot longer for it to actually close.
Uh-huh. So you guys are like the Ferrari.
We can be. We could be the Ferrari to someone's existing Corolla or Camry. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense, because a lot of big corporation that has so much resources, right? And then there's a lot of startup that are trying to solve problems, and for them to get started, it might take a lot more time. So
Hmm.
acquiring a startup or like finding a match, to solve the problems, it definitely accelerating the process and the resources
Yeah.
and
My comment
like
on that my
mhm.
comment on that actually is the fact that like yeah, corporates there's sometimes a stigma with corporates investing in startups just because some startups might be wary about, oh, if we affiliate ourselves with a corporate, does that tie ourselves to them and do other investors not want to see that with us? I'll say like the resources that a corporate offers is so much better, or they have so many more tools at their disposal compared to maybe a
Mhm.
traditional VC who only invests. A corporate, like I said, it could be an investment, it could be an acquisition, and in both of those cases taking the resources of this big corporate, whether that be a customer relationships or just intellectual property and assets, they could help to accelerate the scale and the development of some of these startups projects, especially in the biotech ecosystem. I think the biotech ecosystem being technical and being so heavily reliant on a more specialized understanding of the problem and also the customers. I think corporates have a lot to add and a lot to
Mhm.
provide for startups.
Yeah, especially in terms of the law and regulations, especially in the biotech space, is so complicated, and
Hmm.
you have to complying with so many, like, HIPAA compliances, and for a small startup, they might not have the resources to get past all of these regulations, right?
Hmm. Yeah, that's also what we've been noticing.
Yeah.
We ourselves, we don't advise the startups as often. We, like I said, we primarily work with the corporates. Those are the ones
Mhm.
who are, at the end of the day, those are the ones who are paying us. But we do love to give advice and give direction to startups, especially if we see that they have a really promising product and we really do want to
Mhm.
see that product scale. We want to give
Mhm.
them as much support as possible when it comes to helping them understand all
Um,
those different hurdles that it takes. But at the end of the day, the corporates are the ones who know it best,
right.
and those
Mhm.
are the ones who they should be partnering with.
Mhm. My question though, so they said that when a big corporation acquired a small startup, the innovation died. So like an
Mm,
example of like Google bought Fitbit, right? And Fitbit was actually a leading in wearables with the watch, and now they acquired them, and now it's kind of like silent, like they're kind of like in the back, not
hmm.
much innovations going on. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, it's a very common thing. I think that's in general sometimes why founders leave their cushy tech jobs in the first place is because they might have wanted that young, um, fast-paced work culture that they are used to. But then once they actually join a company that is slower moving and they have much more hierarchy and they
Mhm.
themselves have a lot of regulations and things that slow down the pace of innovation for that company. And it's an unfortunate kind of a reality. Um,
Mhm.
at the end of the day, I think it's just a matter of being honest with who you're talking to, who are the acquirers in those situations.
Mhm.
Google, you would assume being I would say Google is very much on the forefront of innovation. If you see a
Mhm.
lot of what they've been doing, especially lately with Gemini and
Mhm.
the AI
Yeah,
boom
definitely.
themselves, I
They're
think
killing it.
they are specific teams within Google are great at being innovative. But I could imagine that because of those trends, that AI is becoming more of the conversation. Some of the other
Mhm.
projects like wearables are kind of left to the other side of, oh, you're not the hot topic right now. Let's focus on other things. Um,
Right. Mhm.
Sometimes that's just not able to. When the acquisition first happened with Fitbit, no one could have foreseen that funding or resources would have shifted away from that towards other um, big trends.
Mhm.
So sometimes it's just unavoidable. I think it's a reality of if a founder was to be acquired and by a big corporate, I think it should be within their expectation that
Right.
innovation will slow. They will not be as fast and nimble as they were as an independent function. But you give that up for the potential scale and the potential broader distribution of whatever product and whatever offering that the startup is building. That's the ultimately reason why you kind of sell to one of these companies is that they could take it a lot further than you could do on your own.
Mhm. So moving on to investing, I want to ask you, what are the economic climate now that affected the investment strategies in health tech industry?
I think the health tech industry over the last few years has definitely been harder hit than maybe other industries. Venture in general, the last 2 years coming out of 2021, has been hard hit just because of the economic conditions, increased interest rates, geopolitical conflicts, all those things kind of making people nervous.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just been, or you could even just look to that coined term of the year of efficiency. I think it's maybe Mark
Mm-hmm.
Zuckerberg at Meta was coining
I
that
remember
term.
that.
Everyone was trying to cut costs and just instead of the mantra being growth at all costs and like taking out debt and just growing as fast as possible, even if you're not cash flow positive. The last few years has just been this return to, oh no, we got to be able to survive. We have to be cash flow positive. We're not trying to grow as fast as possible. We're just trying to survive. And a lot because of that, a lot of companies didn't make it. A lot of companies kind of within the VC ecosystem have kind of just not been able to raise funding. They've been deadpooled and cast
Mm-hmm.
aside. Um, but as we have seen recently, there are certain, I think, positive momentum when it comes to the capital markets that kind of led me to have a more optimistic look towards 2025. Obviously, we see that the from an interest rate perspective, it's a little bit cheaper to borrow money. Companies themselves might feel a little bit more optimistic about going into an IPO situation or selling to
Mhm.
a bigger corporate. And so, as more of these transactions happen, more VC funds and investors receive liquidity and kind of receive their capital back, and that is then able to be deployed to more companies. So even though the last few years, or last year or two, venture kind of being in this glut and a lot of money flowing more towards later stage companies who are more established and have a more cleaner trajectory for commercialization, I do think that we're going into a year that's a little bit more optimistic that we could afford to be a little bit more risk on,
Mhm.
and some of that money will return back to them early stage companies that, sure, maybe right now they're not profitable and they a limited, I guess, runway, but they have a really great idea and that's worth taking a risk on. I think this coming year will lead to a lot more activity than what the last few years has been.
Yeah, that would be more exciting. Yeah.
Exactly. More
Yeah, but
optimistic too at the end of the day, because right now it's you talk to some people in the biotech ecosystem, or a lot of what I do is going to happy hours and meeting with the ecosystem at events, and especially when it comes to talking with certain digital health or biotech founders, you can just feel the weight of what the last few years has been just for them to make it through. And I'd like to
yeah,
bring some optimism to them where we can look ahead and say there are better things ahead of us.
right. Yeah, I've been talking to a lot of health professionals that just recently got laid off
Mm.
because of the massive biotech laid off. And even my brother-in-law, he was working for Johnson & Johnson. This whole department got cut off. And then like he transferred to a new company, and then like right when he joined, the massive laid off again. What opportunities do you feel like that they can leverage, during this day and age?
It is a difficult situation, and especially when it comes to being a part of a group um, layoff. Sometimes there's just nothing you can do about it, and so you're just left with this unfortunate situation of having to find your way. And maybe that is to another corporate, but like you said, maybe you end up joining a company that is just about to do a cutting cycle. Um,
Yeah.
I think people they have to keep their heads up and I guess continue to for those roles that they feel passionate about. But I guess maybe more so what your question is like, what do you do in the meantime? How do you spend your time if you're just in between jobs? I'm biased towards startups and the venture ecosystem, right? And so for those companies with data science backgrounds, R&D, technical researchers, um, what I found is that there are such a wealth of startups out there that are just looking for advisors to um, either just double check their work or have another perspective towards their offering. Um, I'd like to say that usually it just starts off by being friendly, and you're not necessarily looking for a paid advisorship. You're not necessarily looking to be on the board of directors of these startups, but it just starts with being helpful to the ecosystem. And people, especially founders and founding teams, they remember who was helpful in when they were in that early stage. And assuming that they take your advice and they take you just take their startup further and further, they'll remember that kind of advice, and that might lead to a role in the future. But I think that is the most that personally for me, I think that'd be a great use of someone's time is to actually find certain startups that um, someone could, if they were just if they were just found themselves unemployed, understanding what they feel passionate about, see what kind of companies are out there that are kind of addressing those issues that they're passionate about, and then there you might find yourself down the road advising and being on the board or working on these companies that both align with your technical expertise, but also your own personal passions. And I think that if anything, that's what we're all trying to do out here, right? Is align
Yeah.
those two as best as we can.
Yeah, let's talk about the year of efficiency, right?
Hmm.
So, what emerging trends do you foresee in the biotech, and what do you feel like most excited in the future investments?
Yeah. Talking about AI in the future, I think when most people think about AI and biotech, I feel like most people think of things like AI enhanced drug discovery and a lot of that R&D work. And I think those are really cool and very like eye catching. But I feel like the space has like a ways to go before popular adoption. Even just from like the regulatory perspective, a lot of complexity, validating safety,
Mm-hmm.
efficacy. So personally for me, I think one thing that's interesting from still AI, but within the biotech space is actually more of the boring stuff, the more admin and regulatory processes that can be enhanced through AI. Um, we were at Silicon Foundry. We were helping a one of the top five pharma, big global pharma clients. They were specifically looking towards building their own tool to create clinical trial protocols and protocol design. And within clinical trials is like the earlier stage before they actually go through regulatory approval for a clinical trial. It's a very long process and very manual process at that right now. And so they're trying to find some sort of automation tools to help expedite that. They
Mm-hmm.
threw billions of dollars into creating their own tool, but it actually never really ended up becoming something that was usable. And so they brought us in to help them see what's going on in the market. Are there better tools out there that we could collaborate with, acquire, invest, like I said, all those
Right.
collaboration opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And so, really, what we were helping to do was help find companies that are working in this very specific, I thought it was very niche area of clinical trial protocol design. But we actually found that there are a number of companies just created within the last year or two that have just come up onto the market that are really pushing the envelope when it comes to performance in this area. There's a company called Lindus Health. They're based in the UK, and we met with their CEO, and he was demonstrating to us just the idea, almost like similar to a prompting for a ChatGPT or Perplexity, generating protocol designs just based off of prompting. And this protocol, this tool that they created, it basically accesses the loads of medical records and data and clinical trial, like historical clinical trials that have
Mm-hmm.
ever been created, and helps curate and the right, just populates the protocol so that it actually, at least, of course, it's not ready to go right from the get go, but it saves enormous amounts of time for researchers and clinicians to, and also using accurate and clinically relevant data when it comes to populating those things. So all that to say, I think I'm really excited about all those kind of
Mm-hmm.
boring applications and use
Yeah.
cases within the biotech space that
Mm-hmm.
isn't as sexy as drug discovery and finding new molecules through generative AI. But if anything, I think this is like the low hanging fruit that AI could really just say, create more efficiency, create
Mm-hmm.
more, yeah, to save people time so that they can actually end up doing more impactful things with their time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just feel once the system in place, you have to spend a lot of time, the work that you have to do in order to create an effective system, right? But then once
Hmm.
you able to create that system, you can just really scale. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Still in the
Yes.
we're still in
Cool.
the early innings of it, but I would say that probably within the next few years, it's going to be a lot of really cool innovations when it comes to those admin functions.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, even last year I've talked to a lot of healthcare. Like one of the biggest problem that most doctor physicians are complaining because they spend majority of time on like note taking, you know.
Exactly. Yeah,
And
that's the low
even
hanging fruit as well. I think there are a lot of really cool innovations that are happening, and a lot of these products, um, at least like I said, we from I work a lot with the corporates, and the corporates are looking for something that's enterprise ready right now. And a lot of the times, when it comes to these early stage companies, it might take a little bit longer for them to kind of put, or it takes them some time to create the product, and then it takes them a little bit more time as well to actually prove out the product and actually implement a pilot. So we
Mhm,
try to come in when it's pilot ready, and we could actually see and leverage um, these big pharma companies, their wealth of data that they have underneath, and create some sort of partnership between
mhm,
um, because we know now today that like when it comes to AI, data is the new gold when it comes to training and creating things more efficiently. These big pharma companies have loads and loads of medical data that they've worked over the last few years, but it's all scattered and unstructured and not very usable. But what I've been seeing lately has just been a lot of more collaborations between big tech and startups
mhm,
where it's not the big tech or big pharma acquiring and like consuming these startups, but it's more so just a real collaboration of peers and of equal standing of these startups leveraging their fast-paced nature as well as um, their technical specializations to gain the respect of these big companies. And actually, they have a mutual agreement where they get to use the data of these big companies, and the big companies get to use the output of their product and offering.
mhm. Yeah, so let's circle back on C funding investments. Like it takes so long for the return on investment. especially
Yeah.
in the healthcare industry. What advice do you have for investors out there to balancing out the long term nature of sustainability, like profitable for the investment as well?
Yeah. Bias, like I said, is I think when it comes to speaking to founders and how they approach the space and how they're approaching developing their product, I feel like a lot of startups tend to be only laser focused on venture funding or government grants. But like I've been mentioning before, I'm biased towards corporates, and I think corporates should be more of a conversation as a just another option to consider for these companies, specifically because in this situation that you're mentioning, known as the patient capital. They don't necessarily have the same timelines that a VC has to return capital to their LPs and their investors, like a 3 to 5 year timeline. These corporates can be there for a longer term and can be with the company through the highs and the lows, as well as, like I said, the resources that these corporates can provide. They are not just the assets of, oh, you provide lab space and equipment for whatever endeavor that the startup is going through, but even intellectual resources and being able to knowledge share of some of the researches and the R&D teams of certain biotech companies. They could just provide insights and a new perspective for
Mhm.
these startups to consider. I'll say in terms of longevity, when it comes to some of the biotech companies I've advised with, the key is milestones, right? If you understand that money and capital takes a longer time to realize, or returns or take a longer time to realize and recognize, you have to have some inclination or some evidence of progress over along the way. And just
Mhm.
milestones, however way that they define those, that's the key to keeping the lights on at the end of the day, just because you have something for the VCs or for the corporates to hold on to when it comes to just being with them along this longer journey.
Right.
And one last thing I'll say too on that note is, yes, corporates might be known, especially with the corporate VC landscape. They sometimes get the stigma of being the dumb money of quite venture. They're not quite venture capitalists, but they're also not quite corporates. They're in this awkward middle, and they're just looking to complete deals, and they're not very helpful to the startups. I will say specifically that may or may not be true in general. You
Mhm.
could definitely find examples, but I think more than often than not in the biotech space, in the pharma landscape, the corporate venture teams within this space are very capable. They themselves are ex researchers or ex practitioners, and they themselves might have VC backgrounds, and they are much more sophisticated of investors compared to others. And so, my advice to biotech founders is just to embrace the corporates and to at least entertain those conversations, because no matter what you may have heard about corporate venture in general,
Right.
biotech's a little bit different, and I'd encourage that.
Oh, that's amazing advice. So, as we are into the Health Tech Week, and everybody is talking about JP Morgan Health Tech Conference. So,
Right.
yeah, I would like to share that we are also hosting SF Health Tech Week. And if you're free, I would love to invite you to join.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, we have three different events. The first one is like kickoff for Health Tech Week. It's on January 10th. And then the next one is SF Health Tech Summit is on January 17th. I would like you
Mm.
guys to check them out. And also we have a closing party. And I know that your company is hosting a few event as well, right? Yeah.
Yes, we are. We have a mixer held at Lamar along the Embarcadero in San Francisco on
Mhm.
Tuesday night. Um,
Uh-huh.
Last year was pretty crowded, so I'm hoping it's actually it's always good to have bigger turnout than less.
Oh,
As well as
nice.
a private dinner amongst executives and
Mhm.
just senior leaders in the healthcare space on Wednesday night. So we like to plan both events in general. We like to have big events that bring in as many people like investors, founders, researchers all in the same room. But
Mhm.
we also appreciate the fact of organizing more curated private events just because it's hard to talk to so many people in those big room settings. We like to
Mhm.
create a little bit more intimate setting for those who actually could have really good insights to bring.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, so please, if you're free, I'll leave the links in the show notes of both of our events together so you can just click and join. And I really hope to see everybody there. What do you see the trend that would be coming out this whole Health Tech Week collaborations?
I think it's probably a mix of, like I said, optimism around the year just because of how badly hit the space has been over the last few years. I will say probably also conversations around the new administration coming in soon
Oh
at the end of
yeah.
the month and the implications of all the new changes that will happen, at least as it pertains to the pharma. I think
Mm-hmm.
there will be a shakeup that we will have to endure for the first half of the year, or just first part
Mm-hmm.
of at least the new administration. But
Mm-hmm.
the markets are resilient. The executives and the leadership of these big companies are resilient. So
Yeah.
I'm like I said, I'm remain an optimist and think it's going to be some really cool things happening in the space coming out of this.
Okay. So what is one of the biotech company that you feel like it's gonna do a major breakthrough in 2025?
Yeah, I'll go to the clinical trials part, or the one of the companies I've
Mm-hmm.
come across was called Mendel.ai. They're based in the Bay Area. Essentially, think about they are able to create a generative, think of it as ChatGPT for clinical for clinicians, but
Mm-hmm.
it is hyper trains and performs much better than a ChatGPT in terms of it's actually the AI model that they have developed is particularly trained to think and act like a clinician. So think of the things like hallucinations is a big thing when it comes to generative tools. Especially that's unacceptable within a clinical environment. And if you
Mm-hmm.
want a clinician to access the immense amount of medical records and data that we have on specific trials or specific outcomes, you want to be able to have the results be accurate. What Mendel has done is create an AI that helps kind of sort through and structure all this data, and as well as kind of pull relevant insights so that's actually accurate, like a physician would. So distinguishing just this idea of if a patient had fatigue, was that a symptom of the fatigue, or was that a symptom that was fatigue a symptom of their condition, or was it an outcome of the treatment that they had? Those
Mm-hmm.
kinds of distinguishing factors within a clinical environment are super important to understand and super relevant or just necessary for a tool like this to be used.
Yeah.
So Mendel has been doing some really great work, just unlocking that data and helping that be available to practitioners, clinicians, researchers, and just being a tool for these big companies to use.
So yeah, so I'm excited for this and so glad that you brought this up. So thank you so much, Melvin, for your time today. I really appreciate for you to coming on and really hope to see you at the JP Morgan Health Tech Week.
Absolutely. This has been a pleasure, Serena. So I appreciate you setting up the time.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching in our ELA podcast. Please like and subscribe to our ELA podcast on Spotify and YouTube. Thanks.